everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I want to talk about something I'm relatively passionate about. I've been a traditional storyteller for quite some time. I've been making films for probably about 17 years, written for television, designed games. But a number of years ago, I became really interested in this idea of participatory culture and stories and how storytelling was kind of changing. And I started to see the work that I was making on one side when I was going through traditional means and doing it through whether it be on film or maybe it was shot on film, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was exhibited that way. I felt like I was being limited. And on the other side, I would run these kind of immersive experiences. I would build these kind of games, these alternate reality games at the time, and I would watch where some of them would have, effectively millions of participants, and it would be like this living, breathing organism, and it was so electric and it was so amazing. And fundamentally, at a certain point, I think with the birth of my son, which was 5 years ago, I primarily had done a lot of work that was I had done some documentary stuff, but a lot of the work that I had been doing to that point was kind of more in the psychological realm. The birth of my son kind of opened me up in some amazing ways, which was quite wonderful. But I started to think more about purposeful storytelling, and I started to think more about a future state and started to think more about what I wanted the world to be for him and for his children and so forth and so on. So in doing so, I started to experiment more. And I think what My Sky is Falling is all about is this idea that kind of creativity rests at the edge of failure, right? So like you kind of want to be trying things and experimenting. And so a lot of the work that I do, I feel like is very much like a 21st century rewrite. For anybody that's a writer, it's all about the rewriting. So in a lot of instances, the work that I'm doing is really about rapid prototyping. So what I'm going to talk about today is a project called My Sky is Falling. It's a collaboration that kind of came out of a class that I teach at Columbia University that's called Building Story Worlds, the Art, Craft, and Business of Storytelling in 21C. It's kind of a long title. And Orange Duffel Bag, which works with kids who are aging out of foster care. And the Harmony Institute, which is a nonprofit that works with measuring social impact using data as a way to better track experiences and have an idea of how people are engaging. So Reboot Stories is a company I started a number of years ago. It looks at harnessing storytelling and technology and design science as a vehicle for purposeful storytelling. Columbia University, which you guys know, the class that I teach there. Orange Duffel Bag, as I had mentioned. Basically with Orange Duffel Bag, I think what's really interesting here was originally in my Columbia class, I wanted to pilot something. I wanted to try something. I wanted to try an experience. And I thought it would be interesting to build an immersive story in some way that could be replayable. And so I wanted to try to find a nonprofit that we could work with. And last summer I called Echo, who's the executive director of Orange Duffel Bag, because I had heard about it, and I said, would you be interested in being a part of this pilot thing that I'm going to run through my class, where I'd like to have the students build something that was an immersive experience, something that people could go through, and maybe by going through they could have connect in some way to that emotional journey of a foster care child. And so what Echo ended up telling me in terms of the stories and what those kids were afflicted with, and how the system worked, it at times felt like it was science fiction, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder if I can effectively bring some foster care kids into the environment and create a designing with instead of a designing for. And I started to become really interested in this idea of like, can social services be improved if they're designed with the people that they serve as opposed to just being designed for them? And so what we started to do was we kind of looked at some of the core elements that are faced within aging out of foster care. And for anybody that doesn't know, when a child becomes 18, they're kind of pushed out of the system. And in a lot of ways, they're very ill-prepared for what the real world has to offer. So in this concept of designing with, one of the core elements, when the students at Columbia started tackling this problem, they were tackling it in a way that was very kind of looking and systematically thinking that a lot of the problem was solely within the system. But when the foster care kids came in and they started working with them, it totally changed their whole perception of it. And they started to see that there were actually positive things that were effective within the system, and it wasn't necessarily such a black and white thing. And so that idea of being able to shift perspective became really valuable within the design process. By having the students be able to design something with those foster care kids, we were able to kind of open up all these really interesting possibilities. And so the experience itself, which we ran here today, consists of a number of just kind of immersive experience design tactics and techniques, things that have people bond in certain ways, things that purposely disorient them, things that had memory and other elements within the experience that people could find. And I think the one thing that made everything so powerful was it was based on Lydia Joyner's life, her real life. And her story was so incredibly compelling that, you know, effectively when she was 13, her and her cousin, who had been best friends, were separated. And they were put into the foster care system, and they both had very, very different paths, mainly because Lydia had mentorship from a drama teacher in high school. Her path was very different than her cousin's, who by the time she was 18 was murdered and found in the side of a ditch on a highway. So I think what was interesting was that the emotional side of what Lydia brought. And when she opened it up, and for anybody that went through the experience, there's one moment where it debriefs at the end, and you see all these papers kind of fanned around her. And you realize that they're all the files that define who she is as a person. And I was struck by that, because I wondered if the people who actually ever took the time to look at those individual files had ever seen the volume of what they were fanned out, or how many they were. And that was just one portion of what effectively was 7 boxes full of files that defined who she was. So what's interesting is, like, how good is your solution, right? So within this experience and what we ran here, we've been iterating it over time. We started it at Columbia University. We brought it here. We'll continue to design it, because what we hope to do with the experience is boil it down into a framework that can be released under a Creative Commons license so anybody can execute it. So we try to do it in a way that could be scaled. So any organization could kind of take it and use it as an exercise, or use it as a training opportunity to actually help those potential foster care parents or those social workers that touch into foster care kids' lives to understand that emotional journey that they go through. At the same time, it creates a really interesting kind of cathartic and therapeutic result, as it has with Lydia, where she's able to kind of tap and express herself in ways that she's never been able to do so before, and to be able to share those experiences in very powerful ways. And some people who had a chance to kind of go through the experience and meet Lydia would probably agree with that statement. It was that moment within the experience is very powerful when you come to realize that everything you've gone through is actually rooted within somebody's real life experience. So we chose to make it science fiction on the surface, because the idea was we wanted people to be able to come into it in a way so when we would measure it, we could measure it effectively, right? Because if people knew that they were coming into something that dealt with foster care, they come in with preconceived notions. We wanted to use the science fiction element of it as a way to kind of potentially catch people off guard, put them into an experience where it's more broadly, it doesn't taint effectively what the results are. And also I think that that's really important, because I think there's an interesting opportunity with storytelling to be able to make things that can work on multiple levels. It's okay if something's actually entertaining and thought-provoking. You know, sometimes I think sometimes things in the space are a little, not that it's not meant to be serious, but they start so serious that, you know, it's hard for people to get in, or it's hard to reach wider audiences with them. So with this, we were kind of looking at it and saying, let's start with something that's effectively a science fiction experience. And then it kind of funnels itself down into where you come to realize it's actually based on her real life. So one thing that we did within the experience today, we partnered with MIT, some folks from the MIT Media Lab, and we used these Q sensors. And they basically, you wear them on your wrists, and they track your emotions throughout the the progress of the experience. And at a certain point, I'll turn over to Clint, and Clint will walk you through some of the data that we actually collected today and show you how the experience tracked across different people. But the Q sensor was really interesting because they're using it right now primarily for autism as a way to kind of better understand the emotional elements of what autistic kids are feeling, and they're using it in some innovative and interesting ways. This is supposed to say Harmony Institute, but I don't know if you guys can see it. It's kind of invisible. But what I wanted to do is I'm going to share the floor here with Clint. Clint, if you could come up here. Clint is one of the researchers from the Harmony Institute. And Clint, if you want to share on the Harmony Institute side.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the logo is actually light gray, and I didn't really think about that when putting that on the slide today. But it's really beautiful. It's thin, light Helvetica. I'm sure you can imagine how awesome it is. So we're a research center that actually brings together social scientists and data scientists, and I'm actually a creative technologist there. So I'm not really good at data or really good at social science. I just kind of mash it up and try to make things. And we try to study the impact of entertainment, mostly narrative entertainment, on different types of social issues. Is this clicker the middle one? Okay, so normally in traditional social science, like the boring old way, you know, you get people to walk into a theater and you say, hey, have you heard about foster care? What do you think about it? They watch a documentary on foster care and you ask them afterwards the exact same questions and say, hey, has this film or story influenced you in some way? And obviously they're going to say yes. You know, there are a lot of inherent problems. We all answer questions a lot more altruistically than maybe how we deep down feel. You know, our memory is a little fallible in ways where we don't necessarily remember every step of the story and how we were feeling the entire time. This way is just really antiquated, and we're always trying to find new ways to kind of get at more realistic data, more real-time data. We did a study recently where we did brain scans, and now we're working with Lance to get the Q sensor data, which is pretty fascinating. Normally when we're going through a film or any kind of timeline or piece of content, we use a framework that we call CAR, Comprehension, Attitude, and Response. Comprehension is what are people learning factually about the issue. Attitude is how are they empathizing and understanding a character's journey and life. And response is after a film, what do they see as a way to solve the problem? What would they actually do about it? And so when you're working on a timeline, we have something like My Sky is Falling, where you have a sci-fi layer, you have Lydia's actual story, you have branching, and what you try to do is map everything out. This is actually along the hero's journey, if everyone knows Joseph Campbell's mythos theory. And you can say, well, here's Lydia's story, which is the third row down. Here's how it ties to the social issue directly. And then the sci-fi layer is on top with the two different paths that represent Lydia's story and also her cousin's far more tragic story. And based on that, we're able to code each step for the types of comprehension, attitude, and response that are elicited in the content as you move through something. So when you combine the social science framework of comprehension, attitude, and response across a timeline, and you have really awesome tech like the Q sensor, you're able to get data-driven storytelling. So you're able to see, here's your social issue layer, here's the actual raw emotional data coming out of people's bodies, and you're going to be able to notice where there are patterns of really, really high engagement, and what are the social issue facts and empathy and responses they're picking up from that. And that way we're able to kind of do a feedback loop of what's working right now, what's not working right now. You want to have your most important social issue content at the most engaging parts of your film. So using real-time data and really carefully coding your content, you're going to be able to line that up and iterate. I mean, today we really had to pull this thing together at the last minute, and you're going to see some pretty cool results, I think. This is actually the raw data from today using Affectiva's Q sensor interface. So there were two rounds that we ran. You can see the first group, I mean, the color isn't so great right now, but the first group I know had a lot of people who were familiar with the project. A lot of them knew Lance. They kind of snuck in and got in early. Their lines, not really that high a lot of the time because they kind of got it. They were like wandering around this place the whole time. The second group, though, they were really excited. We had like a mother and daughter team. Are they here? Mother and daughter. Oh, they were such a great. They were really enthusiastic and they loved it. They're really gung-ho. We talked to the actors about it. So you can see their data is kind of crazy and spiking and jumping all over the place. So we took that raw data, and with a really amazing data design and tech team today, we're able to actually code each person as they went through the story along each beat and what their engagement heat map is. So rather than having that line chart you saw, red represents when they're really engaged, blue represents when they're maybe a little bit more chill. I wouldn't say bored, but maybe relaxed. Based on what everyone went through, I don't know how many people went through the experience today. Hands? I didn't even ask for hands. You put your hands up. Thank you. You can see that, like any story, you start off a little slow. They're blue. Eventually, towards the center of it, where people start getting blindfolded and dragged all over the place, they get more and more engaged. At the very end, there's a feedback session with Lydia where everyone kind of sits down. And they also give us qualitative feedback at the end with surveys so we can figure out what they were thinking, what they were feeling, and what they were taking away and responding with after this experience. So to highlight some of the details, this is the beginning when everyone's kind of getting briefed by, I think it's the inventor, who's a really talented actress and goes through this really insane Donna 13 simulation where like data is predicting the entire world. And everyone's kind of stepping in going, okay, what the hell is this thing? So we see a lot of blue and, whoa, can you go back? I guess, is there just a gap in between each one? Yeah. We got this presentation ready like a minute before we got on stage. But you can see the top path is the people who chose the rebel, the good path, and they are the ones who chose Lydia's path, which is sort of the positive, I'd say good ending. And actually 4 people went down and took the negative path, which I guess in a way stories let you kind of understand things without actually having to go through something that tragic. So this is the beginning. I can't even see the text on this. I think that we're supposed to have qualitative feedback on that. Can you jump to the next slide? Oh, here we go. So the people who chose to stay with the Donna 13, so sort of the evil path, you kind of go through what it's like to be over-medicated, to be told in the foster care system that you have really no future, you're asked what your passion is, and you're kind of sent all over the place without anyone really understanding what you're going through, and they're kind of mocking you, they're making you feel kind of really pathetic. I went through this, even I know what's going to happen, and I still felt really mad at this part. So we had one person at the end talk about how belittled they felt, and you can see this is really where the engagement for them spikes. This is where their emotions are really aroused by how belittled they feel and how much they're empathizing with what a foster kid goes through. The people who chose to stay with the Donna 13s, or sorry, the people who chose to go with the rebels, they had to kind of sneak out, so they were blindfolded. You may have bumped into a few of them wandering through the hallways today. And they, kind of had this call to adventure. They charged out there. They had blindfolds on. They were wandering around. And that kind of, I think, empathized with how sort of driven Lydia was to kind of get out there. And you can see, for them, their data was pretty common. This is where they start spiking as well. So it's kind of tying pretty well to Lydia's experience. This is also along Lydia's path. There's a point where the people who've gone the bottom way, the negative way, they're able to change and switch to the Rebels team. And you can see they pull up to the top. And you go outside, and I think you talk about your dream, your passion, and you see this really awesome team dancing out in the streets. And it's very much like an empowering moment for Lydia's life story. And so this is simulated really well. Again, really high engagement, and people literally said they felt liberated at this point in the story. Later on, you go and everyone kind of comes back together. No, this is still on the positive path. People go in and they see the simulation. They're again offered to kind of take drugs, go the negative way through the story. but instead they choose to destroy the simulation, turn down the kind of evil cyborg people, but they kind of resist the temptation later on in the foster care system, and they're tested in how strongly they believe in the system. So it's kind of a loss of authority, and that kind of mapped pretty well here too. Again, pretty high engagement. And then at the end, you get to actually meet Lydia, who was involved earlier, and you weren't aware she was the actual person that this entire story was based on. And so even though everyone's engagement data drops to blue, because one, you're no longer blindfolded and being pulled around, you're just sitting around Lydia and listening, we actually had, on the qualitative feedback on the surveys, people were most engaged at this point, because after going through this really crazy adventure and then realizing it's based on Lydia's life, you're so excited to get to talk to her and learn from her and, you know, really understand her story. And I think this is a really good example of how an immersive story that's participatory and interactive can really get you involved with someone's life, and then you actually get to meet them at the end. And there's a bunch of response sheets where people could take more information, they could donate money and time, and we're tallying all of that up, and we'll probably blog about it soon, but yeah.
So thank you, Clint. Thank you very much. I think what's important there is when we're kind of working through this, it's an iterative design process, and I think in a lot of ways we're looking and saying, okay, how can it be derived as a framework? So when you start to realize where people respond to certain aspects of it, and you can see where it's working in terms of the emotion side of it, it's really powerful, because the idea is that as we take it and we build it into a framework and we figure out how to best let other people implement it, the idea is to try to be able to do it with as little props as possible, that they could do it with cardboard, they could do it with paper. They don't have to necessarily use sensor-based technology, obviously, but they could use it as a way to kind of tell their stories or express themselves. So I think in a sense, what's exciting about kind of looking at this is I think with documentary filmmaking in particular, there's this amazing opportunity to expand the way in which docs reach the world, not only from the distribution of those projects, but also in the way that they actually engage. And what we were talking to you about is at the forefront of looking at measurement of social impact. So anybody that makes a documentary, they're always trying to see, how does it actually activate a community? How can I actually really measure this? How do I know that there was actually impact that took place in the world? And so what we describe here in My Sky is Falling is almost like it could be a companion to a documentary film. It could be a companion to some other piece of work. It could be something that could go in and be a toolkit that was used within schools. It's something that can basically help those who are, aging out of foster care in this particular instance, but the idea is to get it to a framework where any social cause could use it. And what's really interesting about this, and I commend everybody that was a part of it and everybody that helped and volunteered the time to do it, is that the whole idea is to release it under a Creative Commons license, so anybody can make use of it, right? So it's a framework where we share openly the findings and the way where it works and where it doesn't work. So I think within that, the core of it is it's an interesting time because consumption of media is drastically changing. And many people feel like they are storytellers. Many people feel like they are their own media companies. So I think in order to really make impact in the world, you have to kind of, at least with social good or with documentary work or film in general, I think you have to start to look and say, okay, what other tools can I use? How can I expand my palette? How can I effectively get the message out that I want to get out and do it in ways that can be scalable, ways that can be effective? So I think as we kind of go through and we experiment more with the project, you'll be able to find further details here at this link that'll give you full-on details about what we're doing. And this is all kind of derived from this desire that to use storytelling as a way to connect people. We did some really interesting exercises at the very beginning that bonded people in an interesting way relatively quickly. And then people felt that pull when we separated them, like the way Lydia and her cousin were separated by the foster care system. There were things within it that people could immediately feel. And I think what's powerful about that is like thinking about how you can move it just from being on a screen and into people's lives. And then where can it actually be used again? How can it be scalable, reusable, replayable? So I think like film struggles from that. You know, it's very rare that people watch movies more than one time. So I think in order from the ability to really make real impact, you have to find those ways and those tools and those kits and those things that you can push it out into the world. So where we start with something that sounds like, when you hear it, cyborgs and crazy science fiction, you're kind of like, okay, well, what does that have anything to do with foster care? It's a vehicle to bring people in from a wider base and to get them into an issue and make them feel something. And then when they come out on the other side and they have an opportunity to engage with somebody like Lydia, who has such a powerful story, it becomes a transformational thing, not only for someone like Lydia, but also the people that are there. Because when I watched within the debriefs, you heard people talking about their own personal experiences. You heard them sharing about those things. So I think what's exciting about a program like Envision is that idea of looking at how social good and social impact can be more powerful within storytelling. And what we teased here for you today, I think, is something that's really exciting. It's this opportunity to look at something that is kind of foreign to a lot of filmmakers in general, which is this idea of data. But as you start to see it and you can make things quantitative and qualitative, they start to take on more meaning. And that gives you more opportunity to actually make difference in terms of policy change, to make difference in terms of the uptake of what you have, so somebody can see it from a factual side, but then also importantly, they can feel it. So I think as we go forward with this project, the idea is to be able to not only extend it, but as we go forward, we're talking with organizations, foster care organizations in the state of Florida, in the state of California, as a way that this will be implemented and used to train potential foster care parents and social workers and all those people that would normally handle those files that defined Lydia's life, and let them have more of a sense of her emotional journey, or a foster care child's emotional journey.